Splatoon for Wii U versus Splatoon 2 for the Switch. Which game is the better Splatoon game? Let's find out. Hey, what's up you guys, this is SGB618 here, and today I'm going to be putting the original Splatoon game up against Splatoon 2 to see which game is the best. Splatoon 1 was probably my favourite Wii U game, followed by Mario Kart 8. I played so much of this game back in the day, and playing it recently made me realise that it's still a very fun experience, even with the sequel being available now. That's really saying a lot. I'm most likely going to be saying this throughout the video, but Splatoon 2 basically took everything great about the first Splatoon game and expanded on it. It pretty much took a "if it ain't broke don't fix it" approach, which I really appreciate. As always, this video is based entirely on my opinion and my opinion only, so please don't take offense if I say anything that you don't agree with. There is no right or wrong answer to this comparison video, and I think that both games are amazing and both worth your time. But without further ado, let's just go straight into it. So normally I would have a little opening segment talking about the similarities and differences of both games in order to make it clear as to why I put both games up against each other. But if I were to be honest, listing every single similarity, we would be here all day, let's be real. These two games are part in the same young Nintendo franchise, being Splatoon. Splatoon 1 came out in 2015 on the Wii U, and Splatoon 2 came out in 2017 for the Switch. The reason why the original didn't last very long was because of the console it was on. As great as the Wii U was as a system, it was poorly advertised and new IPs were brought out later rather than sooner, leading to a poor lifespan. I wanted to mention this because Splatoon was my favourite game on the system, and I don't think I'm the only person who thinks this. Even though Splatoon was quickly labelled the baby version of Call of Duty, if you actually took the time to play it yourself, you will notice that Splatoon was nothing like anything else, whether it's on Nintendo's platforms or all platforms. There are ink squids paintballing, shape-shifting and using extremely unconventional weapons like paint rollers, paint brushes, buckets and even the NES zapper. And the aim of the game isn't the typical last man standing goal like with most shooters. You either cover the most turf, carry a weapon to the other side of the map, playing a football-esque game and other stuff like that. Splatoon was and still is a crazy and unique concept to a game, but the execution of the ideas lead to the creation of a very fun game. Unlike most first entries where they have a long way to go in terms of quality and then things get better with the later entry, Splatoon 1 got most things right from the start. I can even say that in a world where Splatoon 2 exists and even a third entry on the way, Splatoon 1 is still a very fun game to play to this day. One phrase I hear a lot is "if it ain't broke don't fix it." I think this is very true in a lot of cases. If there's nothing wrong with a product and it did very well, do it again and just build on it. I'm very happy to say that that's what Nintendo did with Splatoon 2 for the Nintendo Switch. To me, Nintendo took Splatoon 1, expanded on it and made it look even prettier. The gameplay, concept and enjoyment levels are pretty much the same as the original, but there's just more in it due to the expanded content. Umbrellas, Julies, Salmon Run, Octo Expansion and more. So this must mean that Splatoon 2 is automatically the best Splatoon game, right? Well, it's not as simple as that. Yes, Splatoon 2 did include some very nice quality of life changes, like being able to change your weapons in between matches and allowing for a wider selection of control options. But outside of some of the touch-ups I just mentioned and the larger selection of weapons and stages, it overall just feels like more of Splatoon 1 with nice improvements rather than a game that makes it feel completely different and makes the original feel trash in comparison. This isn't like Mario Kart 7 and Mario Kart 8 for example. Those two games feel completely different and they have their own identity, whereas Splatoon 1 and 2 feel very similar, to the point that they have mostly the same pros and cons. Both games have very nice controls, not too complicated, Both games feature really nice outfits, shoes and accessories for your character. Both games have my biggest complaints. Yes, Splatoon 2 didn't improve on absolutely everything, and the list goes on. I don't think I've even put a dent in the similarities, to be honest. So is there anything that I like more in one game over the other one? Firstly, I think that Splatoon 1 has the slightly better / more memorable soundtrack. I think that the music from the first game is a lot more intense, iconic, and even down to the stuff like the shop music, it's just a lot better in my opinion, and I think it's so good. Splatoon 2's soundtrack is still really good, don't get me wrong, but Splatoon 1's music just gives the overall game more character, and I actually think that the original had more catchy themes, whereas Splatoon 2's themes felt a bit more replaced instead of sounding unique. Another thing that I like better in Splatoon 1 over Splatoon 2 is the story mode. Splatoon 2 story mode is fine, but I think the original had a more enjoyable campaign, and I definitely think that it had the better final boss fight as well. However, Splatoon 2 could arguably regain this point as Octo expansion exists. I unfortunately have never tried it, so I can't really say anything on it, but just the fact that you can buy an additional story mode, and on top of that you can play as a different character rather than just the Inklings, it puts Splatoon 2 at a bit of an advantage in that regard. And another thing, I think that Splatoon 2 had far more interesting topics and themes for Splatfest over the original. Even down to the last theme Splatfest, the Pearl and Marina Splatfest was more than just Pearl vs Marina. The theme was Chaos vs Order. So yeah, you did need to decide which character you liked more, but you also needed to think about the Chaos and Order side of things. And on top of that, this hasn't even been confirmed yet, but it looks like Splatoon 3 is set in the time where the winning team of the Splatfest took over Inkopolis, being Team Chaos. So it potentially had an impact of Splatoon 3 story mode, which I think is really cool. Even though I was on Team Order, but that's besides the point. On a more obvious note, I think that Splatoon 2 looks better because it's taking advantage of the power from the Nintendo Switch versus Splatoon 1 and the Wii U. The ink is a lot more shiny and the overall colours of the game are a lot more vibrant. Splatoon 1 definitely looks a tad washed out, plus it's a bit odd to see that the ink is just a block colour rather than being shiny. So Splatoon 1 and 2 definitely had a lot to offer the player in terms of content, plus they did one up each other in certain areas. But what about the cons? As much as I enjoy these games, not only is it sad to see that Splatoon 2 hasn't gotten rid of some of these problems, but these problems are incredibly dumb and unnecessary. If someone disconnects from the lobby during a game, there's no CPU players to replace them, so your whole team is at a disadvantage when this does happen. I understand that Splatoon doesn't have a mode to play with computers, so it somewhat makes sense as to why there's no CPUs to replace disconnected players, but they should have incorporated CPUs for emergencies because your whole team is basically now at a disadvantage because a player went off. And literally, the game does nothing about it. No replacements, no kicks for balancing out the game, nothing. If Mario Kart 8 and Deluxe can do it, then there's no excuse for this issue. I'm hoping and praying that Splatoon 3 fixes this because it can be really frustrating. I think I'm more annoyed with Splatoon 2 than Splatoon 1 in this situation, because this could have been such a simple fix. But no. Splatoon 1 is allowed to mess up, it's the first one in the entry. Splatoon 2 should be cleaning house with the issues, not keeping them in. Speaking of old problems, Sheldon. Okay, I understand that this character is supposed to be super chatty and annoying, and I get that. But this character makes buying weapons and checking out prices for weapons so tedious. I do admittedly think that it's funny and absurd to have a character who can talk for this long before letting the player do something. But now I absolutely hate shopping for weapons because I know I'm going to be there for a very, very long time. Again, Splatoon 2 did nothing about this. Gotta love it. Now I had a bit of a problem with the original game, which I'm glad that they've toned down a little bit in Splatoon 2, which is the balancing of the matches. There were two specials in Splatoon 1 that made matches feel a bit one-sided and a bit too chaotic at times. The Ink Strike and the Kraken. I'm not upset to see the Kraken go, I hated that thing and it was so broken. It killed players in one hit, it had a massive hitbox, it was fast, and it lasted way too long. I'm so glad that I don't have to see that thing again. Splatoon 3, don't let me down, man. On the other hand, I'm kinda sad to see the Ink Strike go because it was so fun and satisfying to pull off. But yeah, let's be real, it was pretty broken. I think the Booyah Bomb and the Tenta Missiles are definitely nice replacements for it, and they're a lot more fair in my opinion. The fact that Splatoon 2 replaced these two Splatoon 1 specials specifically made things a lot more fair and balanced overall, which was a nice improvement. Just make sure that everyone on your team actually stays in the game and doesn't disconnect, and then it will be a fair match. So, which game is the best? Like I said at the beginning of this video, these games are very similar and both of them are worth playing. I've sunk so many hours into both of these games and they're definitely some of my favourite modern games that I've played. They're definitely some of my favourite games on their consoles and you really can't go wrong with either one of them. But I think I may need to give the slightest edge to Splatoon 2. Like, when I mean the slightest edge, I mean like a digit, literally. Nintendo took Splatoon 1 and basically expanded as well as making some improvements here and there. I really love the salmon run mode, new weapons, larger stage selection, more multiplayer methods, and the Splatfest themes. All of these elements made the Splatoon experience for me a lot more enjoyable. Don't get me wrong, I still love the original game, but Splatoon 2 basically did the same and adds more content on top of that. Yeah, sure, Splatoon 2 still has a few crummy leftovers from the original, but I'm hoping that this game is an overall stepping stone and a small taster for what we're getting for Splatoon 3. But until that day arrives, Splatoon 2 is the best Splatoon game at the moment, in my opinion. But anyway guys, that's going to be the end of today's video, so hopefully you did enjoy it. Please comment down below your thoughts on the points I made in this video. Did you agree with them? Did you not? And let me know which game you prefer. I'll be very interested to know. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.